When we're talking about fatherless young women, what's that unique impact for young women that grow up without a father?
Well, it shows up in different ways. One of the major ways is the feeling of abandonment, because they feel this feeling of my dad left me or my dad didn't show up for me. It doesn't reflect on what's wrong with him. It reflects on what's wrong with me. As they get older, it starts to show itself in different ways. And one of the ways is like people pleasing. Two extremes, right? It's either they try to do everything to prove their worth or their love for people. On the other side, sometimes they push people away for that same reason. In their mind, this thing can end at any time.
Welcome to the Managing Mental Health podcast. Join us as we talk to leading psychologists about all areas of mental health, and we hear from real people that have experienced real mental health struggles who can now share hope and encouragement for us all. I'm Jamie, social psychologist, author, and trauma recovery coach. Our guest today is Earnest James. Earnest is a family man, father, and friend with a heart for people. As a podcaster, mentor, and speaker, he's dedicated his life to inspiring and uplifting others. His mission is to help others deal, heal, and fulfill. Earnest was raised in a two-parent household, but he recognized the effects of fatherlessness on extended family and friends who were being raised by single mothers. He is determined now to help heal families by helping fatherless mothers and daughters heal from father wounds. Earnest, welcome to the show.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How's everything going?
Everything is going well, man. I appreciate you for having me. Always glad to be on this side of the mic where I ain't got to do nothing but talk. So I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, good. So give me a little information about your podcast. How long have you been doing it? What's your focus? What kind of subjects do you talk about?
So thank you again. Thank you for having me. My name is Earnest James, and I have two podcasts that I run right now. I actually have my YouTube channel. It's called the Deal to Heal Podcasting Network on YouTube. And I have 4 podcasts that's on that channel right now. 2 of them is actively actively run. So my main podcast is called the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast. And on that podcast, my guests and I talk about different topics and ways to help us to heal in every area of our lives. And so I talk about things that I've been through: divorce, depression, suicidal ideations, and all of those things. And for things that I haven't been through, I bring on other guests, coaches, professionals, or speakers to tell their story and lend their expertise, so that if anyone in the audience is dealing with something that that the speaker may have been going through, then we can leave them with some kind of tips and information to help them get through, those same things. That podcast I've been doing a little over 4 years. We just recently released our 200th episode on that podcast. And my second podcast is called Girl Dad Discussions. I am a girl dad. My daughter is 22 years old at the moment. And I started that podcast after going through some relationship things and reflecting back on my dating history and even my marriage history. And I realized that every woman I ever talked to or I ever dated was a fatherless daughter. And so once I realized that, I said, well, what can I do to kind of help this demographic of women that I've been coming in contact with? And so I started a page on Instagram called Friends of Fatherless Daughters, just kind of giving my, advice as a girl dad and as someone who had dated, fatherless daughters. And that kind of actually was the beginning of my podcasting career, because I didn't have a podcast or anything at that time. And I was just going on and kind of giving my advice, as a father. And someone called me and said, would you like to be on my podcast? And I said, okay. And after that one podcast, I got a couple more phone calls. I ended up doing like 7. And the guest of one of those podcasts, I sat down with him for lunch and we were having a conversation. And he said, I think you should have your own podcast. And so that's how the first podcast was born. But that connection with the fatherless daughters never left my heart. And so on the Deal to Heal podcast, whenever I would have a girl dad on, I would always ask them two questions. What does it mean for you to be a girl dad? And what is something that your daughter has taught you? And just those two questions, I would ask at the very beginning of the interview. And just those two questions, I always got amazing, answers to those questions. And so after a while, I was just like, you know what? This should be a whole podcast by itself. And so the Girl Dad Discussions podcast was born. And so those are my two major podcasts that I'm working on. I probably got like 50 something episodes of the Girl Dad Discussions podcast. And again, recently released the 200th episode. I think I'm on like 210 now of the Deal to Heal with James podcast. But yeah, those are the podcasts. I've been doing it a little while.
I see that. That's awesome. Yeah. Even as you just mentioned those two questions that you ask other fathers, I'm a girl father. My daughter was my first, so I'm a girl dad. And just you speaking those words and those questions, I felt it. I felt it in me, even though you weren't asking me for your show. Just hearing it, I felt it, and I think that's something special with fathers of girls, that there's an emotional connection there that's different than with boys. With boys, I think, and I also have a son. He's the youngest of my two, and I think there's sort of a kind of a camaraderie. You're proud, and you have a lot of things in common with your son. But with your daughter, you always, no matter how old they get, there's this sense of protection. There's a sense of caring and nurturing and coaching and guiding, and that you want to do for your daughter. So when we're talking about fatherless young women, what, in your experience in doing this and working with people and talking with people, what do you feel is what's that unique impact for young women that grow up without a father, or with an unreliable or inconsistent father? What's that like for them?
Well, it shows up in different ways. One of the major ways is the feeling of abandonment, right? And that kind of goes hand in hand with the feeling of self-worth at the same time, because they feel this feeling of, my dad left me, or my dad didn't show up for me. And usually that doesn't reflect on, especially from growing up from a child's point of view, it doesn't reflect on what's wrong with him, that he didn't show up for me. It reflects on what's wrong with me. You know what I mean? And so they grow up with that. And as they get older, it starts to show itself in different ways. And one of the ways is like people pleasing. A lot of the time it's like two extremes, right? It's either they try to do everything to prove their worth or their love for people, you know what I mean, so that they can be accepted. And on the other hand, on the other side, sometimes they push people away for that same reason. Like, I'm not going to give you a chance to leave me. You know what I mean? So even in relationships, a lot of times they self-sabotage some of their relationships. And it may be a great relationship, but in their mind, this thing can end at any time. You know what I'm saying? Because if my dad walked away, I can't trust any other man not to walk away. And so even though the relationship might be great, sometimes they have that feeling like, you know what, the shoe could drop at any time. He can leave at any time. And maybe, I just think it's better than it is. So before he leaves me, I'm going to leave, or I'm going to do something to make him leave. Then at least I'm in control of him leaving. You know what I mean? And so those are two of the major ways that it show up.
Yeah, that's extremely powerful. I mean, you started off hitting the nail on the head there with abandonment. It creates that abandonment wound because, like you said, a child, uh, if a parent leaves, they don't see it as the parent doing something bad or wrong. In that sense, they see it as in what's wrong with me, exactly like you said. And it's interesting too because the two extremes that you mentioned. So one is either people pleasing. A girl may tend to want to try to do everything to try to earn that person's love in that sense, or push them away. And like you said, also maybe try to get out of the relationship first so that they can do it and it not be done to them. What do you see in terms of society, how that has impacted us in society with those either or both of those extremes?
I think some of that one way that I know that it shows up is the independence, right? And not that women shouldn't be independent, right? But there comes uh, or should I say, there's been a wave of I don't need you, right? Type of thing. And as we know, every child needs their parents, both father and the mother, But when you grow up in a space where you've never had a man to show up for you, then it's like, okay, I got to do everything myself. And sometimes it gets to the space where because you've had to do things by yourself, or at least because you felt you had to do things by yourself, when you get to a certain space, then it's like, well, I've got this far without you. I don't need you. And that shows up in the communities. It shows up, as us as a people, but then it even shows up in our relationships, or should I say in the relationships that the women have with their mates, and even the relationship they have with their fathers, if that father comes back around. Because a lot of times we do get at certain ages and things of that nature, you get those reconnection stories where the father, comes back into the picture for wherever he's been. Now he's back in the picture and they're trying to reconnect, and rebuild this relationship that, does have been lost. And even in that, sometimes with them wanting the relationship, they still fight an internal battle of, but I don't need you, or you left me. I remember having a conversation with a young lady, and she was in her 20s at this point, and she was talking about her relationship with her father. Her father he was around, you know what I mean? Never was active, never was, really present in her life, but he was around because the family, grandmothers, she would see him around. So he wasn't like far away. So she knew who he was and things of that nature, but they just didn't have a good relationship. And when we had this conversation, she was saying how she wanted, a relationship with him. And she was like, but he ain't did this, he didn't did that. And I said, well, at one point you were a child, but you're a young adult now. You're like, so if that's something that you want, then you act on it. Don't wait for him to come and, build the relationship that you want. If that's a relationship that you want, then you take the initiative and, reach out to him and things of that nature. Because you've already been waiting 20-something years for him. So how's that working? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so if this is a relationship that you want, then you may have to take ownership of it and start to put things in place to make it to become what you want it to be. And there was some actions that she took on herself to start building that relationship with him. But I think that again, that's how it shows up, because it's that internal battle of I've come this far without you, and so I don't need you. Yet that little girl on the inside is yearning for that relationship. So it's like you got the grown woman who now is Miss Independent and I don't need you, but you got the little girl inside that's saying, yeah, but I still want my dad. You know what I mean? And so that's an internal battle that they fight every day.
Yeah, no matter what happens in our lives, we still want and need the affection and the care that we didn't get as children.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I can see that. And do you think that So what happens to these young ladies that then have children themselves? How do they deal with that being a mother? Do they pass any of that animosity
Yeah.
or any of that grief
Yes.
or anything? Do they pass it down?
They definitely pass it down. So in my research in the earlier days when I first started this whole thing, and I remember talking to a fatherless daughter coach. It was a young lady. She was a young lady, and I was talking to her, just kind of having a conversation about it. But one of the statistics that she said to me was that there's a high statistic that fatherless, she said fatherless daughters, but it actually goes both ways. But there's a high statistic that fatherless children will have fatherless children,
Hmm.
right? And so that's from the male and the female's part.
Mm-hmm.
And in my work, as I began to work with, fatherless daughters, one of the questions that I would ask them is, what generation of fatherlessness are you? Are you first generation? Or was your mother a fatherless daughter? Was her mother a fatherless daughter? You know what I mean? And how far does it go back? And then once they're able to really start seeing the generational patterns, then my next question is, and so how many generations will come after you? Or will you start to do some healing and some self-reflection and things of that nature so you don't pass that on to the next generation? But yes, it definitely is a behavior that is passed down, and not even intentionally. It's just through your reality. Your reality, you grow up, there's women in the house, there's no men in the house. And so you got women doing, playing both roles as the mother and the father and the provider and doing that. And so that's how they show up in their relationships and in their homes. And so just by default, it kind of flows that way. And like I said, it goes on both sides. I remember having a conversation with a young lady who, she grew up without her father, and her husband at the time grew up without his father. His father actually had got killed when he was very young. So he grew up without his dad. And so one of the things that he would always say was, when I have children, I'm going to be active in the life of my children. I would never, leave my children. Well, fast forward years later, he has 4 sons, and he's not he's not present in their life. And so I was talking to her about that the thing is, our brain, and this is the way I explain it, our brain is like a computer. It can do a whole lot of stuff, but it can only operate on the information that it has. And so even though in his heart, he wanted to show up as a great father in the lives of his sons, his reality is he has no record of what that looks like, because he didn't grow up with his dad. He didn't grow up with uncles and mentors and people, male figures that took out time with him. So even though he wanted to show up that way, he has no information on what that looks like. And so just by autopilot, he just kind of goes with the flow and end up showing up in the only way he knows how, which is to be absent. And so what I began to tell her and him as well is, you have to make intentional steps to become the man that you want to be. If you want to be a better father, you got to start reading the books. You got to start getting a father mentor, right? You got to start getting around men who are actively in the lives of their children and seeing what that looks like. So now you have an example, because you grew up, you didn't have that example, but that can't be your excuse. You know what I mean? Like you're a father now. You know what I mean? So you can't use this the excuse that you grew up without your father. Okay, you did, but now you're an adult. Now you have children of your own. And if you want them to have a different reality than what you had, then you have to actively put in the work to make sure you show up differently than your father. And in his case, he didn't really have a choice. His father died, so he couldn't show up. But yet and still, you have to now, since you don't want to be absent in your kid's life, you have to look for that information. You got to get those mentors. You got to get around those other fathers and really, realize what that is, what that looks like. How am I supposed to show up? How am I supposed to be an example, for my sons? And then, that goes both ways, whether it's the the fatherless daughters or the fatherless sons, or motherless daughters and motherless sons. It goes across the board, just in anything that we do, or anything that just like anything else that we want to be great at. We want to be great athletes, we get coaches. We train and all of that. So in every area of our lives, we have to do the same thing, even in our parenting. We want to be good parents. We got to join the PTA. We got to be around those other parents that's doing it. We got to go to the football game. We put our kids in sports, and a lot of times, like, put your kids in sports and then you leave and now they on the coach. No, you need to be around that coach. Excuse me. You need to be around that coach. You need to be around those other fathers and mothers that's showing up for their kids, that's sitting in the stands with the t-shirt on. You need all of that so that you know how to show up in a way that you didn't get that example growing up, but now that you're an adult, you can look for those examples and become those examples with the people around you.
Absolutely, man. That's good stuff. Yeah. Culture is influenced and learned, and it becomes social behavior. And then you've got on top of that, if you have childhood trauma, that influences how you think about yourself, how you think about the people around you. And to break cycles, you have to be intentional about it. If you just let the river run, it's going to keep running downstream. And you've got to do something different to change the course of that river. Put up blocks, build bridges, dams, all those things. That's what it takes. And my experiences with people, and working in the nonprofit field, I work with victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, as a coach, people that have been victims of trauma. It's not fair. And I hear people say this. They say, like you mentioned earlier, you said, the young lady, you said, look, this might be the way your dad treated you or responded to you or was absent, whatever, but now you're an adult. So now you are responsible for making a decision if you want to change. And people say, well, it's not fair because that was their job. They were supposed to. And they are absolutely 100% correct. It's not fair. But to change it, if you're recognizing that, hey, this isn't right, now you're responsible for making that change. And I think one of the good things about that is that even in acknowledging and trying and making an effort, you start becoming a better person, even if you don't get the results that you wish you could, because it doesn't always turn out good. But even if it doesn't, you become someone stronger and better. You become someone that not just talks the talk, but walks the walk of, here's healthy behavior, here's healthy relationships, and I'm willing to do what it takes to get there, and which will pass along to your children and your friends and family and other people in society.
Yeah. And I want to touch on two things that you said, right? So the first one is, as a motivational speaker, which I am also, I talk to different people. So one of the speeches that I give somewhat is coming from that viewpoint that you mentioned earlier, right? Of when things happen to you, whatever, it's like, it's not my fault. And what I say is, it's not my fault, but it's my fight, right? So I didn't do anything to put myself in this position, right? I didn't build the ring. I didn't put the boxing gloves on. You know what I mean? I didn't train. I just woke up and now I'm in this ring, right? So it's not my fault that I'm here, but it's my fight for me to get out of it. You know what I mean? Like, I got to show up for myself. I got to fight this fight that, even though it's not fair because I didn't ask for it, I didn't train for it, I didn't volunteer for it, but I'm here. And now that I find myself in this ring, the only way I'm going to get out is if I fight out, right? And so I always say, no, you're exactly right. It's not your fault, but it's your fight. And either you're going to lay down and just let it beat you up, or you're going to start fighting to get through this thing, And the other part about what you said is about the person that you become, because things may not always work out the way that you wanted it to. And so I started talking about the young lady who wanted the relationship with her father. And I didn't tell the end of the story, right? On purpose. I wanted to kind of end it on a good note. But you mentioned it don't always work out. And so what happened with that situation is she had two sisters. And so it was three of them all together. And so after, my talk with her about, one of the relationships, so her and her sisters got together. They went to her dad's home where he was staying, and they were like, all right, Dad, we want to have daddy-daughter date, right? And we're going to take you out to lunch or whatever and all this stuff. And he's like, all right, cool, that's great. He's like, all right, let me run to the store right quick. I'll be right back. He went to the store and never came back. And so all three of his daughters are sitting at his house waiting for him to come back. And he never came back, And so having a follow-up conversation after that, and I said, well, now you know where he stands. You know what I mean? And so now you're faced with another choice. Are you going to accept that that's just the father that you have and accept him on his terms and not expect him to be who you want him to be, but just accept him as who he is? And so also by accepting, you now allow yourself to put up the boundaries and things that need to be in place to protect yourself so you don't get hurt again. You know what I mean? And so that's all a process. That's all a part of that fight. Either you're going to let it beat you down for the rest of your life and say, oh, my dad never showed up, or you're going to say, okay, I see the type of person that he is. Let me learn, from his mistakes. Let me learn from who he is so I know what to look for and what not to look for, even when it comes to, again, your male friendships or your male dating history and things of that nature, because now you have an example. You know what I mean? Even though it's an example of what not to do, that's just as important as an example of what is to do. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so, yes, I wasn't going to share that part of the story, but sometimes it doesn't work out. But one of the things that I've learned, through life, you never really have losses. You have wins and you have lessons, And so with everything that you go through, if you can look for the lessons in it and find the lessons and realize what you're supposed to learn from it, then you can take something away from it. My pastor used to say, a lot of people always ask him when they're going through different things, and they would say, well, I'm going through these different tests in my life. How long would this test last? And he would always say, it'll last until you pass, right? So if you keep failing, you're going to keep having to take it over again. So if you can learn the lessons that you're supposed to learn in whatever that you're going through, whatever loss, and even the lessons in your wins, if you can learn the lessons, then you can pass the test and move on to the next one.
Awesome. Yeah. And that's a great segue actually to kind of the part two of this discussion. And something I read of yours said, and I quote, "We must heal ourselves. When we heal ourselves, we heal our families heal our communities, and our communities heal our world." So what does that mean exactly?
Well, because, like you mentioned, and even in your work, we have so many traumas, right? We have so many things that we grow up with, things that we experience in our lives that affect us from our childhood all the way up through our adulthood. And, one of the things that I've come to realize is that in our actual adulthood, we don't necessarily go through a lot of traumas. You know what I mean? Most of it happens in our childhood, and then we carry it through our adulthood, right? And so because of that, there are things that we as adults we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. We're dealing with in our lives. Some things we don't even know subconsciously. We kind of on autopilot, dealing with. And those things have to be healed within us. And we talked about, things getting passed on generationally. If we don't heal it, right, we take those things not only with us, but then we take it into our families. And now we're passing those traumas to our children, and our children are now dealing with it. And so our children leave our home and they go out to the community. So now the community is dealing with it. Our communities affect our government and our world. So now our government, our world is dealing with it. So it's a domino effect. And it starts with us. And I always tell people, you might not be able to change the world, but you can change your world. And if you change your world, it will affect, everything else that you touch. And so I really do believe that, like, if we learn to heal ourselves and really change ourselves and deal with the things that we are dealing with, personally, then it affects the people around us. And it also gives those people permission to deal with their demons and to deal with their things, right? And I'll give you an example about that. I did my first TEDx talk, I think it was last year, and I was talking about surviving suicidal ideations, right? And I've had so many opportunities from that, on different stages. But even more so, I've had opportunities to show up for people just on a day-to-day basis, right? So I'll give this example. Recently, I was at work, and I'm a bricklayer by trade, right? I work in the construction field. And on this particular day, it was just me by myself and one other gentleman who was a laborer, right? And we had to work together to do the project that we were working on, just the two of us. And I had never worked with him before. We worked on the same job, but we had never worked together. So in our working together, we're just talking, and I mentioned that, I did a podcast, and he asked about the podcast, and I kind of told him that, what the podcast was about and things of that nature. And so when I told him, like I talk about the things that I've been through, including suicidal ideation, he started talking, right? And he started sharing some things with me about him having suicidal ideations, his father actually dying by suicide, and him having to be the one who found his father's body. Like we had a real in-depth conversation. And he said to me, so we had this conversation probably about an hour, right? We're having this conversation while we're working, and then it comes, lunchtime, and we, go to lunch, and he go to lunch, and I go to lunch, and then, we come back together after lunch, and he comes up to me, he says, Ernest, you're a real cool guy to talk to, because I've never shared that with anyone, And so one of the things that I say, again, with me dealing with my own healing, with me being able to heal through that and being very vocal about it, especially among men, it opens that door for them to then be able to talk about the things that they're going through. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so vocal about it. I remember when I first started talking about my experience, and I did, a couple podcast episodes about it. I have 8 siblings. And my baby sister called me, and she said, how is it you went through that whole situation where you're literally thinking about, committing suicide, and none of us know? And I said, because we weren't having the conversations, And so I've been very vocal after my experience, especially after having that conversation with my sister and knowing as many men as I know that are dealing with different things. I'm very vocal about my dealing with depression. I'm very vocal about dealing with suicidal ideations and divorce and all the things that I've been through, because it opens that door, especially for men, to be vulnerable. Now they can say, well, I'm kind of going through the same thing. You know what I mean? And then building that safe space for them to feel free to talk about it. Because, the suicidal rate for men is very high. You know what I'm saying? Because we hold so much in, and we try, especially in the construction, which I was kind of surprised when I started doing the research of the suicidal rate in the construction industry is like within the top 5. And I was surprised to hear it when I heard it, but then it made sense when I started to think about it, because we are a male-dominated field. We are always competitive on the job, who's the best and who can do it. And we all show up in this male bravado and masculinity, and none of us want to admit that we're dealing with some stuff. You know what I mean? We're always trying to, save face on the job with one another. And the truth of the matter is, we all are human, and we're all dealing with divorce, and we're dealing with, death of a parent, and we're dealing with, sick children, and all of these things that we can't talk about because we got to show up. We got to be manly, especially in the construction field. Like, yeah, we're the manly men, you know what I'm saying? And so we got to show up that way. And so I'm very vocal about, my experiences, because I want men in general, I want everybody, but definitely men, to feel safe enough to have the conversations, because I may be the only, like I mentioned about the gentleman on the job, I'm the only one he shared that story with. He may not never share it again, but at least that day, at that time, he was able to release some of that he had been carrying. And so if I can just do that one a day, one a year, one however many times with one man, that just give them the opportunity to release and go on to the next day a little bit lighter from the burdens that they carry, then I think I've done, my job. I've done a good job. And so that's kind of my spiel, man. That's how I try to live my life.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. Thank you for your vulnerability and your willingness to discuss those issues, especially with men, because it's not easy, because we are taught to just man up and not show emotions. And even when we're encouraged to be vulnerable and show emotions, when we do, we get ridiculed for it. So it is a huge epidemic. It's over 80% of all suicides are men. The statistics are 1 every 11 minutes. So just as you and I have been talking, 2 or 3 men have committed suicide. And it's horrific, and it's a shame that we're so advanced scientifically and culturally and all these things that we still have such a difficult time even talking about these issues and finding ways to deal with them. And so, yes, it just takes some conversations, some difficult conversations. I heard one speaker, and I can't remember who it was specifically, but they were just saying that, you know what, life is hard sometimes. Getting up at 5:30 in the morning to go to work is hard, but so is staying in bed all day. That's hard, because you're going to have consequences from it. Keeping your emotions bottled up and trying to pretend to be, made of steel all day, every day is hard. He said, but talking to someone might seem scary and hard at first, but on the other side of that is going to be release and a part of the peace that you need in your heart and your mind to carry forward in life. So the speaker was saying, just pick your heart. Because both sides of this equation are going to be hard. Just pick one, but try to pick the one that's going to have the good benefits to it. So yeah, very, very important. And again, I appreciate you being the person to speak out about those things. We need it. We need it. All right. So before we close out, what would be maybe 1 or 2 just key points that you could offer in terms of fatherless young women, or I would just say just anybody that's, had to deal with difficulty in their life and have experienced the pain of that? What's 1 or 2 takeaways that you could offer that would lead to healing?
Yeah. So I'll share the acronym that I developed when I was dealing with my suicidal ideations, right? And so when I did my TEDx talk, the name of it originally was "Have Fun with Suicidal Ideation," right? But fun is an acronym. And if you look it up online, that TEDx did release it, but they changed the name. They changed the name of it. But I said have fun with suicidal ideation for 2 reasons. Number one, that it's going to be like, what, have fun, but that'll get your attention. But fun, FUN, is an acronym. I'm a person that loves acronyms, right? So when I was dealing with my suicidal ideations and the way that I kind of got through it, and this can be applied to different areas of your life, right? So I had to learn to have fun, FUN, which stands for focus, unite, and normalize, right? And so one of the things I had to deal with was focus. And so when I was going through, my situation that I was in, it was a lot of things I was going through at one time. My mother-in-law at the time, who I was very close to, died. My mother died. I was going through a divorce. I was in debt because the economy took a hit. I'm a bricklayer. So when the economy takes a hit, the construction field takes a hit. So I was going in debt. I was going through a divorce. I was depressed. So I had a whole, I always say I was living a D life at that time, because it was like death, divorce, depression, like everything was like, bam, slap me upside the head. And so I found myself in this space where all of these things were happening to me that I couldn't control. Right. I had no control over any of it. I couldn't change any of it. And it's like, but I'm dealing with it and I'm trying to carry it. And that's what kind of really pressed upon me to the point that I became suicidal. And so I was focusing on all of these things that I couldn't control. And I remember the day that things changed for me. My daughter at the time was probably about 5 or 6. And we're sitting at home and she's playing in the front yard. I got the sprinklers on and the little kiddie pool, and she's running, playing in the water and stuff. And I'm sitting on the porch and I'm just watching her. And she's running around, she's playing, and then she stops and she runs over to me and she starts crying. And I'm like, what's wrong? It's, nothing happened, that I could see at that moment. It's like, you're just playing. And so she runs over to me and she starts crying. And I said, what's wrong? Why are you crying? And she said, I miss my grandmothers, because at this time, both of her grandmothers had passed. And it was just in that moment, just like the grief just hit her in that moment, And I thought to myself, my daughter was a daddy's girl, still is a daddy's girl. And I thought to myself, what would happen to her if I'm no longer here? And so that's when my focus began to change, because I was focusing on everything that was happening to me, that I couldn't change, and I'm feeling hopeless and I'm feeling helpless. And I'm like, man, there's nothing I can do about these things that I'm dealing with. And that's what I was focusing on. But when that happened with my daughter, I said to myself, if for no other reason, I have to stay here and make sure she's okay. And so that became my focus. I can't change nothing that's happened to me, but I can protect her as much as I can. I can be here for her as much as I can. I can show up for her as much as I can. And that became my focus. And so when I talk about the F stands for focus. So whatever you have to focus on, because I've had this conversation with therapists too on my podcast, and they said, well, Ernest, we teach our clients to focus on themselves and so they can change whatever they need to change. And I said, look, I can't tell you how to do your job. I'm not a therapist. You know what I mean? But I can tell you what worked for me. So whether you need to focus on yourself or whether you need to focus on someone else, just make sure you focus in the area that gives you purpose, so that gives you the purpose to come, to stay another day, to hang on another day, to get through another day, right? And so that was the F. The F stands for focus. Then the U stands for unite, right? And so as I was dealing with my grief after my mom passed and my mother-in-law passed, I started going to bereavement support groups. And in that space, I was able to connect with other people who were also grieving different loss and different family members and different, through different circumstances. And we were able to support each other. We were able to, have compassion with one another, and to be able to console one another. And so what I realized in that space, you have that community of like-minded people that's going through like-minded experiences. And so the unite stands for come together with people that's dealing with the same things that you're dealing with, or even if it's not something that you're dealing with, like I said, it can be applied to different areas. If you have something that you want to do, you want to be an entrepreneur, you want to be a college graduate, whatever it is that you want to do, go to where those people are and hang with those people, become part of that community, unite with that community, and then that community will give you the support and the help that you need. So that's where the use comes for unite. And lastly is the N. So also in bereavement, I heard this concept that I had never heard before, and it was the concept of the new normal, because your loved one has passed, and so your life will never be the same, right? You went through all these changes, different things is happening. It will never be normal in the way that it was, but it can be a new normal. And once you embrace this new normal of, okay, for myself, my mom is not here anymore. My mother-in-law is not here anymore. But what does that mean for me? I can accept this new normal, but that they're not here physically, but they're still in my heart, and I still can show up and in the spaces in my life and still be able to, move forward, because now I've accepted that this is my new normal. And so once you accept that this is your new normal, then you can still begin to find those spaces where you can be happy again, you can love again, you can live again, because now this is the new normal, that now your new existence that you operate in. And so that is the acronym, the fun acronym. Again, focus, unite, and normalize. And that was the thing that helped me get through my suicidal ideations. But again, it can be applied to anything, in your life that you're aiming to overcome, or you're aiming to create and be a part of. You're like, all right, let me get my focus right. Let me get in the right community. Let me accept this, how this shows up in my life now. And then it just work with those changes.
Awesome. I love it. Fun, focus, unite, and new normal. That's a easy and powerful acronym to remember. I like that. Well, I appreciate so much everything you've shared with us today. I think our listeners are going to get a lot out of it for a long time to come. And so real quick, how best can people reach out to you, get your resources, connect with you, things like that?
Yeah. So if you guys go to earnestjamesspeakslife.com, that is my website, my speaker's website, actually. So you can, find out more about me as a speaker, find out more about, having me to come out to speak at your organization or school. You can find me there. If you look me up on YouTube, look up Deal to Heal Podcasting Network. And again, you will find the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast, which is my first podcast, over 200 episodes. You'll also find the Girl Dad Discussions podcast there as well. On Facebook, you can find me as under Earnest James. Instagram, I think I'm Earnest James Speaker. So the two major spaces I would say is earnestjamesspeakslife.com, which is my speaker's website. And you can always look me up on YouTube or your podcast listening platforms at the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast.
Awesome. And for our listeners, I will definitely have some links in the description for you. So please go and support Earnest and check out his resources and the incredible experience and wealth of knowledge and encouragement that he has for young women that have not had the father that they should have, and for men that might just feel like you're all alone and that you don't have the support you need, that there are people that have experienced similar things and are here for you and to support you. So listeners, what resonated with you the most? What questions do you have? Please tell me in the comments. And again, I'll have links for Earnest's website and podcast in the description. Please subscribe, like, comment, and share to stay connected with this community of mental well-being as we learn and grow together.
Hey, Jamie, I could say one thing too. Especially for the fathers and for the daughters. I wrote an ebook called The Core Four, which is the core 4 values that every daughter should get from her father, right? And so that ebook can be found at ebooksbyejames.com. I think that's a valuable resource for the daughters and the fathers, just by knowing, at its core, those values that you should be either receiving from your father as a daughter, or as a father, you should be, pouring into your daughters. Again, it's called the Core 4, which is the core 4 values that every daughter should receive from her father. And that's at ebooksbyejames.com.
All right. Awesome. I'll add a link to that as well. All right, listeners, thank you very much for joining us. And again, we look forward to the next episode.